formally start the recording again because I'm still chatting with you guys as I'm trying. Okay, now this is the real recording. So does that say it's going on your side? Recording? Super. Okay, awesome. Well, I am going to share my screen and we can look at what's coming up for us. So I will share the Blackboard. Do you see it? Awesome. Okay. Yep. Cool. So we're currently wrapping up week 6. And as you guys know, there's a quiz this week. You've done one before, so you're familiar with the basics of that. It really is just content scattered throughout the reading and throughout the information that we've been reviewing so far, just some main ideas. So you'll see questions that feel a little random because they really are targeting a lot of different points and ideas. And I'll send out an announcement to address that, like I had just mentioned. But we do want to look ahead before we look at our presentation to week 7. So we are now, time flies, it's hard to believe, we are almost halfway through the course. So we know, yeah, because we only have 15 weeks. So we'll be wrapping up later in the spring. So we really have at this point hit on nearly half of the bulk of the content. And I think you'll notice the reading does move back and forth in the book from chapter here to a chapter there, but it really is formatted in a way that it's step by step as we go, giving you things that will build upon one another. Does it feel pretty smooth like that? Thumbs up. Or does it feel a little confusing? Emily, I would love, if you have a comment, I would love to hear.
Yeah, it's kind of hard when you jump around so much in the book when they like reference to like, oh, in this chapter, blah, blah, that we haven't read yet. I'm like, oh, we'll get there. So that's a little bit confusing. Mm-hmm. But I think just kind of like you said, like we did start out kind of like in the development and just kind of all that. So that's a little bit easier. It's just crazy. It's a long book. It's a big book.
Oh, it is. And you guys are doing such a great job. I'm really impressed with several of you that I've been in touch with regarding just how to best approach such a lengthy text. Because what we know is that we're probably not going to sit down and thoroughly read and enjoy every single word in the text that is hundreds of pages long. I'm not saying don't read the text. I'm saying we need to learn how to approach it. Right? What is the most valuable and important information for me here? What feels maybe a little repetitive or maybe is or is not connected to the main idea that I'm trying to grab? What's the vocab term, you know, the term like die on a hill? What do I need to die on a hill about? Like, I have to know this, I have to know this. Or what can I kind of let float away and maybe pick it up again later? So it's important as we're going through the text, and I've been in touch with several people about this too, with the chapters that you're assigned, just looking for those bold terms, looking for the headings. And you guys know that already, but it's just a reminder. If it's bold, we want to know it. And if it's, you know, with the title of a chapter, we capture the main idea. So then points that are leading back to that, we want to take down. And that can be taking them down mentally. It can be taking them down typing or on paper in notes. Some people love video notes or audio notes where they can talk about the terms it depends if you're more of an auditory person, but they can record maybe on a phone or another device, talk about the terms and then listen to them again, hear yourself saying that. Some people love flashcards. I know that sometimes they feel like, oh, in 2nd grade I did these, but they are still good for adults. I, in fact, made a lot of flashcards in college, and it's fun because you can do colorful cards for different categories of terms, and that can be a good way to get the visual component as well. So it's a big, large, bulky text, but the information is really good, and we do have still many more weeks to tackle it. So stay with it. You guys are doing a great job. Week 7, as we're wrapping up week 6, I will say the topic for week 7 will be sensation, perception, thought, and language. So this is more of this cognitive side. What are we experiencing around us and how are we taking that in? How are we thinking about it? And then how are we expressing our views or our opinions about it? And that's language. So you can see this top bullet point, thinking about expectations, context, emotions, motivation, and how that influences perception. You might have heard the quote, perception is reality. And in particular, I have worked with a lot of people in the autism spectrum. And that was a term that I heard a lot early in my practice, was that some students I've worked with who have autism really firmly believe this is what occurred. So this person was making fun of me or laughing at me, or something happened. And I would observe the situation and say, no, I think that you're having some perseveration on that and you're getting stuck in that thought. And in reality, that's not what they meant. And so I, as a practitioner, would be trying to explain that. And it wasn't very helpful because the person was really thinking in that direction. And so older, more experienced practitioners would say to me, perception is the reality. So for that person, for that student, in that moment, what they're saying they felt happened in their mind really happened. Now, you might have watched it and said that's absolutely not what happened, but we have to approach and support that child with their narrative of reality in mind. And so that's the idea of perception. And I'm not talking about lying, right? That's different. But the perception is this is really what I believe is the case. And we know in our lives, we might think about political issues or some of the major current events that have been going on, and we perceive them in one way. And I can guarantee you've probably heard other people speak about them who perceive them in different ways. And our perception might feel like our reality. So we might want to say, no, this is how it is. But in truth, we know that the Bible is the source of true reality and true honesty for us in our living. That is where the truth can be found. And this news source or that news source, no matter how good they might be, and they may be reporting the truth, but humans always have some kind of a bias, right? And we've talked about bias in research a little bit. You've been reading and working through bias, unfortunately, cannot be eliminated. We can work really hard to be aware of it. When we're aware of it, we can reduce it. But our bias or our perspectives, our perceptions can't just go away. It's part of being a human. And our biases or our perceptions are built based upon, like you see in this bullet, expectations, context, emotions, and motivation. So we'll be going through a lot of that in the upcoming week, along with several other things. Here's bias down here again, memory, thinking and language. And so this reading will get us started on that. And then in units, even after week 7, we'll still be diving into more of this, but that's just kind of a little intro. And what I'm going to do now as we pull up the presentation is actually talk through some theories of development. Does that sound good? Cool. We hit on them a little bit last time we met, but I really want to make sure that we dive into them with some more depth because it's something that we have reviewed over the past several weeks within the content of reading and studying. And so I want to make sure that during our video time, we get the opportunity to do that too. So what I'm going to do is try to move to that, and then you can tell me, do you see the green? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so first of all, as you've been reading about different theories, does this name ring a bell for you? Bronfenbrenner. A little bit. We'll talk about it and we'll see, you may have background with this even from prior to our class. So we'll talk through what he believes and it may bring up some memories, but this is Urie Bronfenbrenner. I enjoy his last name. I think it's cool and fun to say. He was a fundamental researcher in the field of human development. And you can see he lived a nice long life and he actually died not too long ago. He died in 2005. So his work is fairly recent and therefore quite relevant to us as well. He developed a lot of different ideas over his career, but the main one that we're aware of just in the basic psychology is ecological systems theory. And there's a beautiful circle visual that comes along with this, which I will show you on the next slide. But first, we'll talk through each of these bullet points. So his proposal, as he's talking about the development of a human being, starting a very, very young age and all the way through life, is that we are influenced by several systems. And he identified 4 main systems. So I'll show you the visual now just so you can have it to reference. So this is the child, right? You or me or any child that we know. The child is born into the first sphere of influence here, or the first system, which he refers to as the microsystem. And the microsystem would be those who are very, very close to us, our closest sphere of influence. We might see them on a daily basis. So obviously the parent, okay? And if the child doesn't have a parent or parents, then it would be the primary caregiver. Now, as we know from attachment theory, if a child doesn't have a consistent primary caregiver, that can cause a lot of difficulties with development. And so there are some children I know, for instance, there have been orphanages in various countries where those orphanages will be used for internships for people who want to provide care to a baby. A period that I heard of was 3 weeks. And that was a Russian orphanage was the one I had been talking with somebody about. But it's a 3-week internship in this particular orphanage. So you think about the little baby children there. They have lost their parent or parents and now are being parented by interns. And so a kind and wonderful, or maybe not so kind person comes in, and the baby child bonds to that person, to the smell or scent of that person, the sound of that person's voice, and the demeanor of that person. And then right as the child's getting connected, then the internship is over. It's been 3 weeks. I got my certificate, off I go to work in wherever. And now the new interns come in. And so when we think about the microsystem, consistency is very important, or else children don't know what to expect and they may start to feel very insecure. And that's something we'll get into further, especially as we talk about attachment theory. But for the microsystem, we do, as I said, want to see that consistency. So first with the little baby, primary caregiver or caregivers. Oftentimes that's a parent, siblings, if they are present as well. And as a child gets older, that'll be close friends, could be a teacher or teachers. So that's our little influence system, the microsystem, as it says here, first and the most immediate. The next one would be the mesosystem. And the mesosystem would be the community. Okay, so this would be relationships. People from the microsystem might be involved in the mesosystem. An example of that could be if my 3rd grade teacher is in my microsystem, my school is my mesosystem. Okay, so it's still very influential. We still might make contact every day, but it's not that close bond. Maybe my youth group leader is my microsection, or excuse me, my microsystem, but my youth group or church itself, the system, is a part of my meso layer of these spheres of influence. Okay, so obviously, mesosystem is still very important. As it says, religious group, that could be church, the neighborhood community. I know some people get really close with those on their block or something like that. Cul-de-sac kind of a culture, so or in an apartment complex, that could be part of the mesosystem. The exosystem is getting bigger, as you can see. These layers are getting wider. So that one is described as it's kind of the bigger picture, like the school board. It could be the systems of funding. They don't, like, you know, your child is generally not going to meet the superintendent, but the superintendent has a big influence upon the life of the child. And so we're getting bigger and more expanded into the exosystem. The decisions made by those entities can make or break the situation for this little child right here in the yellow as we get broader and broader, even though those in the exosystem may have never met the child. So we think about the media. That's obviously a huge influence, as we know, the government. This could be extended family, people you're not as close with, but still have an impact on you. And in some situations, the welfare system or social support systems within the government could have a big impact here too. So for instance, policies related to food stamps, that could be a part of the exosystem, impacting the family, which then impacts the parent, which ultimately impacts the child. So this is all just spheres of influence centering in for that child. And then the widest, largest is the macro system. So you guys have totally caught on to the process of thought here. We're just getting even bigger picture. This is the biggest picture of all. So the values, legal components, the culture is a big part of this. Ideologies or customs, as you can see over here. And that all then plays down into the church or the school or the family or the neighborhood. Okay, so that's the idea of the influences, Bronfenbrenner said all of these systems influence the child, and they're all required to create the identity of that child. So if you would like to add, before we move on, does anything come to mind, anybody here, regarding your systems growing up, or even still currently? One component in your mesosystem or exosystem or microsystem that you can identify that has been influential for you. You don't have to share, but if you would like to. Or you can keep thinking about it and email me. Oh.
I can't really think of one off the top of my head. So yeah.
That's okay. It's just kind of food for thought, you know, so no worries, but it's good to know about it and see if there's something you can apply. Bounce it off me by email if you want to, or you can just kind of keep thinking through it. So that is this theory of Bronfenbrenner. And we did begin to talk about Erikson's work in the previous video, but I'd like to go in a little bit more depth here as we're thinking about human development. We've covered a lot about it. You guys all did really nice papers about the influences on a child. So this is Erikson. It kind of helps to put a face to the name sometimes. That's him. Now you know who he is. And he did pass away in 94. So again, not that long ago. And he identified several stages. You can see they're organized in color here. Stages of development, psychosocial development is what he calls his theory. So when you're looking through these, you can see that each stage has a conflict that a person encounters. And so his theory was that in the first nearly 2 years of life, a child is working through trust versus mistrust. Can I trust this caretaker? And as I shared the example with a baby in the orphanage, mistrust is probably going to develop there, because I thought that you were my person and you were going to feed me and take care of me in the night. And lo and behold, you're gone without a trace. I'm too young to understand why you're gone. I think that you've abandoned me. Here's a new one. Oh, wait, they're gone. No, nobody has filled the vacancy. What's going to happen? So that's where the trust versus mistrust comes in. And in healthy development, this conflict would be resolved during this age period with trust. And then the child would move into these next just a little over a year with autonomy versus shame and doubt, and into each conflict after that. And so we'll talk through what they are here. We just hit on this with the little infants. A very important part of this would be feeding the child, obviously, because the child cannot feed himself or herself. And so to receive that care from the provider develops the child with into a place of hope and into a place of trust. And if this is not consistently happening, the child may develop pretty significant mistrust. And then getting older, as I just mentioned, the autonomy versus shame and doubt. This makes us think about confidence in the self. So a child during this time is really trying to work on walking and running. Am I capable? Falling down and being able to get back up. And we want the child to develop confidence. It can be a little bit difficult for parents to be okay with the child falling down, be okay with the child trying. You know, if the child's trying to buckle the seatbelt and you're running late, you might really desperately just want to do it for them. But this is the opportunity for the child to develop the autonomy and the independence and the confidence, instead of spiraling into shame and doubt that then can continue to be a problem later. So you may be familiar with the term learned helplessness. And this is when children, and we've hit on it a little bit previous in the content a couple weeks ago, but this is when children learn that they are helpless and they're not. So it's the concept of a child coming and saying, can you zip my coat? Can you zip my coat? And the adult thinks that they're being helpful. They have the best interest in mind. They want it to go quickly. They don't want the child to zip the finger. Let's just get it done. Yeah, I'll zip your coat. But if we don't ever try to scaffold that into independent zipping of the coat, the child eventually just thinks, I can't zip my coat. I'm too stupid to zip my coat. I don't know how to zip my coat. Help me. And actually, in a task like that, fine motor development of the fingers and the hands is that practice is very important. So if the child never tries to write, never tries to zip, the muscles aren't going to go along with those tasks either. They won't have the dexterity. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. We have to let them try. And so this is the autonomy versus the shame and doubt phase. Obviously, it's important throughout life, but Erikson argued this is the stage in which it would be most valuable. Okay, which moves us into initiative versus guilt, his next conflict that he talked about. And this would be a time of a lot of play and a lot of exploration. And this would be kids roughly 3 to 5 years old. Erikson talked about lots of the good or bad concepts here. This is when you'll see more guilt with a child. So, if a child is 2 and she or he hits somebody, you're probably not going to see a ton of guilt, but several years down the road, you might see more. So that's where we're looking at the conscience, understanding the impact that we have on other people. Am I a bad kid? Am I a good kid? And, in the Christian household, it's not about you being a bad or a good child. It's about all of us are sinners. We're all in need of grace, and the Holy Spirit within us empowers us to live that virtuous life and to help others and to be good to others and to ourselves, and to ultimately become more Christ-like. So that's kind of the biblical perspective on this conflict, but it is really an opportunity for play, for exploration. It's kind of a really fun phase in a way. It's fun how kids get so imaginative. And then that moves us into a lengthy stage, which is industry versus inferiority. And you can see that this is several more years. So this is kind of the elementary school up through middle school, not teenagers yet. But the concept of industry is that we are productive. We're getting something done. We're motivated. We're learning something. And as you know, inferiority, it just means we're less than, we're unsuccessful, we're not capable. So, if a child is just watching TV through these years, it doesn't take any skill or mastery to watch TV. It doesn't take any grit and resilience to watch TV. So a child might start to develop feelings of inferiority. But what does take skill and mastery and grit is schoolwork, and not just academic work, but also learning to play a musical instrument, or learning a sport, or learning an artistic technique. This could be anything. It doesn't have to just be school. But the concept of industry is that we're getting busy, we're doing something, we're finishing the math worksheet, we're creating a product. And this is actually part of why video games appeal so much to kids. I mean, really to a lot of people, but particularly in this age group and also in adolescence. Video games offer a sense of mastery. Most of them do. Because if you think about the structure, you're trying to accomplish a task. And children love that. They love getting to the next level. It satisfies their need for industry here, feeling successful. The basic virtue or their achievement, their aim during this time is competence, right? So I know that we're hitting 3:30. Question for those on, do you want to stick around for a little bit and finish these stages, or do you need to depart? Thumbs up if you can stick around.
I can stick around for like 15 minutes probably, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to go too long. I want to respect your time, but it would be weird to stop in the middle of the stages. So we'll just knock this out. Thank you. Yes, so that's the industry versus the inferiority. And this is all still Erikson's work. And the idea is, going back up to these many different colors here, that if you fall into, let's say you develop feelings of inferiority in the age 5 to 13, they talk so much about how kids really need a sense of mastery. Oftentimes for kids, that's school. It's not going to be everything in school, but when you reflect, you might think, oh yeah, I had so much trouble with reading, but I was really good at math. Or I had so much trouble with, there's always going to be something that you say, yes, I liked that. I enjoyed playing the piano. I did that well, whatever it is. And it could be athletics as well. But they always say kids need that feeling of mastery. And so if they don't have it, they're falling into this inferiority of, I'm not good at anything. I'm not competent. I feel worthless. I feel useless. And we all know where that can go. That's not a good mental or emotional, psychological direction. We want children to be able to know their purpose and their value, not only for who they are, but also for the great things that they can accomplish. And so, especially if a child is struggling in school, we got to target this one and really think about, okay, it's okay that school is hard. Maybe there's a learning disability or something's going on, but what can we do to help you still achieve the industry sense of satisfaction, the mastery? Because if we're not, you're going to be going down into that phase of inferiority, and you can't then have a healthy transition into identity versus role confusion, which is the next stage from Erikson. And Erikson puts this really through the adolescent years, but even into the early adulthood, college age type years, kind of moving out of this around 21. Obviously, it's different for everybody. But this one we talked about in more depth last time. This one's pretty clear. It's just, who am I? The basic concept of that. A person trying to determine identity. And oftentimes this can have a lot to do with family and saying, do I agree with everything my family says? You know, my family has always loved to live in a rural area and wants to live in the rural area. And maybe I don't like the rural area and I'd like to be in an urban area. And how do I deal with that? You know, that's weird. That means me being away from them. Maybe my values are a little different. Those kinds of questions. And it can also move into a lot of questions about even faith, like, you know, determining, hey, this is what I've been taught. But if my parents were to pass away, and so I was raised in a Christian home, and somebody did ask me in my teenage years, if your parents were to pass away sadly and horribly in a car accident and just be gone one day without any expectation of it happening, would you still be a Christian? And that's the question, is separating from the family, separating from the influences. What do you believe? And it's a beautiful opportunity to develop that faith for your own self, right? But it's a process, and it does take time to have that maturity coming. And it's not just for faith. It could be, as I said, for where you want to live, what you want to study. I have a friend whose entire family was teachers. Both of her parents were teachers. Both of her sisters are teachers. And she just grew up and just said, I love you guys, but I have no desire to be a teacher. And it was kind of weird. And she went off and did something else, and it turned out well. But that was a hard realization for her to come to, because it was kind of just an expectation within the family. And that was a big priority. So that moves us into the early/mid adulthood. And this is the intimacy versus isolation. So this is when people are asking questions like, should I get married? Do I want to get married? Does, you know, is God's will for me to be married? And if so, to whom? That's the next big question. When? Those kinds of things. And it's not just marriage. Okay, because when we hear intimacy and isolation, we think about romance and dating and engagement and marriage, but this is also connections with friends and with colleagues and with family. So really going through these years, you know, you're not living in a college dorm setting where there's people everywhere. In adulthood, maintaining friendships takes a lot of hard work because everybody's very busy and everybody has their lives. And then people start having children and this and that is going on. And so it really is a decision to say, if you have a spouse, we're going to stay close and connected. We're going to make the effort. And with friends, we're going to stay close and connected. I still want you in my life. I don't want you to float away and become that person that I talked to you 10 years ago. Because naturally, that's kind of what happens unless you take that action. So this was the conflict that he talked about in those middle years is, will I or should I get married? Will I or should I or can I or do I want to have a children? And what will I do with my friendships? Do I want to just work by myself? Do I want to have a bunch of coworkers? Where will I put my boundaries? I know you guys know the value of boundaries, but I always say in this early adulthood, and especially in the years of the 20s, knowing boundaries and practicing boundaries is the key survival skill. Like if a person gets out of their 20s being able to do boundaries, and what I mean is like being able to say no in a confident and appropriate and respectful way, being able to say, this is what I will do or will not do for somebody else. This is what I need. These are my deal breakers or non-negotiables in a relationship, those kinds of statements. Boundaries are essential. So this can be a part of that too, is how can I be close to somebody without becoming enmeshed and codependent and unhealthy? How can I be close to a friend or family or spouse, but still have myself? And still keep my priorities straight and put God first and know who I am and what I want, and not just push the whole world away and say, I don't need anybody. That's a hard line to kind of walk, and it goes back and forth over the years. And if a person has a bad breakup or loses somebody close to them, it can affect this process. So that's what Erickson talked about. And he's got 2 more stages he talked about. This one is 40 to 65-ish. So that's generativity versus stagnation. I have family members who are in this age group, and I have shared this information with them, and they find it really funny. They loved it. They said, we don't want to become stagnant. And so, as you know, stagnant, like stagnant water, it's not moving. It's just kind of getting yucky. And generativity is being creative and producing things and being alive and lively. And the conflict in this age is, am I going to just kind of hole up and slow down and give up? If I had kids, they're kind of gone away. They don't really need me anymore. If I, do I have a spouse? Is the marriage worked out? All sorts of complicated things that people are questioning. And so in generativity, it's people getting involved. And if they're not working, maybe finding a way to volunteer or to be more a part of the community and the church or whatever it may be, getting up and about and engaging in life and not moving into that stagnation where there's a lot of focus on self, not much outreach to others, maybe moving into fear or bitterness or cynicism, and that kind of rejection of other people. That stagnation, as you hear it, will put people in a dark place that really doesn't set them up for a good later year in the later years of their life. And that pulls us to the final stage, which is ego integrity versus despair. So obviously not everybody lives to be 80 years old. We pray and hope for long life because we know God has a lot for us to do here, and we want to be here and enjoy it with the people we love as well. But these stages would look different for somebody who passes away tragically at 21 or 32, right? So this is based on the traditional long lifespan. And as you can see, the ego integrity versus despair, this is working through regret, because I can guarantee any of us on this call, even at a younger age than this, can think of things that we regret. I mean, we've all said and done things that have been hurtful, or we're not what God wanted of us, and we're not our best selves. And so the regrets are going to be there. And especially for people who have parented, lots of times it's, oh, I shouldn't have worked so much. I should have spent more time with my kids. Or, oh, I should have made that career change. I hated my work. Or, I should have gone to law school. I shouldn't have gone to law school. It could be any of those things. And so really being able to come to terms with those, and instead to, again, down at the bottom, as it says, engage, stay connected, relationships, and finding that joy in life, especially because in this age, process, people hitting 70, people hitting 80, physical health can be declining, or physical energy. And so to be able to still stay engaged in whatever possible capacity is really important to avoid moving into this despair of it's too late now, disengaging and feeling really negatively about the self for, oh, I was a terrible this, I was a terrible that. That really leads to a lot of isolation. And as you guys have seen with the coronavirus situation, unfortunately, a lot of older people have been much more isolated than ever before because they have so many restrictions. And so that's why this is more important than ever for people to be able to use the technology or whatever opportunity they have to connect with the older people in their lives to help them remain in this ego integrity stage of this conflict, to be involved, to be joyful, and to have those reminders. It's amazing. in a retirement home setting, if there's Bible studies. I had a family member in a retirement home who went to Bible study. This was before the coronavirus, every single day. And she also did fitness classes there. And it was so amazing to see her after her spouse had died, staying so engaged. And I think that that helped her to live longer. So it's a good thing to think about, not only for ourselves, but for the others in our lives that we know and how we can best support them depending on what stage they're in. It also gives us some sympathy and empathy and compassion if we see somebody floating into the wrong side of the stage. For instance, back in the adolescence stage, if we see somebody floating into role confusion and they're just saying a lot of things that really don't make sense, and they're changing things about themselves all the time, and they're, you know, contradicting themselves. If we think about this stage, it helps us to say, okay, you know, I understand what you're going through. I want to support you. So that's Erickson's work. Any questions before we wrap up? No. Okay, I will post an announcement regarding the quiz. And then we've got office hours next week on Friday, and then we'll do another class the week after that. Okay. All right. Have a wonderful weekend. Yes.
Thank you. You as well.
Okay, thanks, guys.